So today we're working with the volumes of cylinders. Now, a cylinder is basically a prism, except the base is a circle. All right, so notice we've got a circle down here and directly across from it, the exact same circle up top. And the only dimensions you really need on a cylinder are the radius, which is the distance from the center to the edge of the circle base, and the height, which is the distance between the two circles. Okay? Now, the volume formula for a cylinder is just like a prism. The area of the base times the height. But because cylinders all have circles for their base, we can just think of the area of the base as pi times the radius squared. All right? So your formula is really pi times the radius squared times height. Let's do some examples so you can see this in action here. All right? So here, we've got a cylinder here, and we know the radius is 8. We know the height is 20. All right? So if I want the volume, I'm going to do the area of the base, so that's pi times the radius squared, so 8 squared. And then I'm going to multiply the area of the base by the height. In this case, the height is 20. Okay? So whatever that equals is going to be our volume. Now, because we have pi in here, I'm going to give your volume in two different ways. One way, I'm going to give an exact form in terms of pi, meaning I'm going to multiply everything in here on my calculator except the pi. So I'll do the 8 squared. I'll do the times 20. I get 1,280. But I didn't put the pi in the calculator because I'm going to leave pi next to the 1,280. So this is 1280 pi centimeters cubed. And that's what we call our exact answer in terms of pi, meaning whatever 1280 times pi is will give me the exact volume. All right, I didn't have to round it. I didn't have to deal with any decimals. It just comes out to exactly whatever that equals. Okay, now if you want the approximate answer, what we would do is actually put 1280 times pi into the calculator. So 1280 times pi, and we're going to get a crazy decimal because obviously pi is irrational. So we're going to have to round it. It's about 4,021 point, let's round it to the 10th, 2. All right, centimeters cubed. And that's what we consider our approximate answer. And it's approximate because we had to round it. Okay, this isn't exactly the volume. It's a little bit bigger than this volume. But we rounded it, and it's fairly close, so we'd say it's an approximate volume. Okay, so make sure you know the difference between these two. All right, in higher levels of math, we actually prefer the exact answer with pi in there because it's easier to work with. And I'm going to give you a couple more examples, and you're about to see why it's easier to work with this one. Okay, so let's do example 2. This one's the exact opposite of the problem we just did because I'm going to give you the volume this time. The volume of a cylinder is 6,300 pi centimeters cubed. If the radius is 15 centimeters, what's the height? Okay, so this time I gave you the volume. I did not give you the height. I did give you the radius though. Okay, so we're going to set up an algebra equation using our volume formula. Okay, so we know the volume of a cylinder is pi times the radius squared. In this case, the radius is 15 squared, times the height. We don't know the height, so we'll call it x. Okay, and that's the formula to equal the volume. In this case, we know the volume, 6,300 pi. Okay, and that's my equation that I can use to solve and find the height. All right, now notice the volume does give you, they do give you the volume in terms of pi, which actually turns out to be very convenient. And here's why. I've got to multiply by pi on this side, so to solve this equation, I would divide both sides by pi. All right, and when I do that, watch what happens. Multiplying by pi and dividing by pi undo each other on this side, and I get 15 squared times x over here. On the other side, I also have times pi, and when I divide by pi, those undo each other. So I end up just getting 6,300. You see, by leaving pi in my volume, it was just easier to work with later because they just undid each other when I divided by pi. Okay? Now let's continue solving this. I probably should have simplified this earlier. 15 squared is 225. So this is really 225x equals 6,300. Because now I'm just one step away from solving. Divide both sides by 225 and I should have my answer here. Let's see what we get. So those undo each other. X equals, let's see what we get. 6,300 divided by 225. 28. All right. So the height's going to be 28 centimeters based on that volume. Okay. So notice, because the volume was in terms of pi, this made it a really nice, clean, easy problem to work with. There weren't any crazy decimals. I didn't have to do any rounding. All right. And it comes out nice and clean. But what if the volume wasn't in terms of pi? Well, I've got a second example here to show you what that will look like. And get ready, because it's going to get a little messy. But if you have a decent calculator, it's not going to be too bad. Here we go. The volume of a cylinder is 900 centimeters cubed. Notice, no pi in there this time. If the height is 19 centimeters, what is its radius? Okay, so there's a couple of differences this time. This time, we don't know the radius, but we know the height. And also this time, the volume is not in terms of pi. So it's going to get a little messy. But let's set up our equation. The volume formula for a cylinder, pi, times the radius squared, we don't know the radius, so times x squared, times the height, 19, equals the volume. All right, so all I did was use my volume formula to set up an equation, okay? Now, at first, this doesn't look any harder than the one we just did, but very quickly you're going to see that actually it is. So let me get my calculator ready. All right, so we've got x times all these things, pi times all of these things. So my first step, I'm just going to divide both sides by pi, just like I did last time. Divide by pi. Now, multiply and divide by pi and do each other. And I'm left with x squared times 19 equals. Now on the other side, 900 divided by pi. This time there's no pi to cancel it out, so I'm actually going to have to divide on my calculator. 900 divided by pi. Boom. Kind of a mess, but that's okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn this into an approximately equal sign, and I'm just going to round this to 286.5. But even though I wrote that down, that's not the number I'm going to use. I'm going to actually use this number when calculating my next step. All right, so I'm going to keep it on my calculator screen because I'm going to try to be as precise as possible as I work through this. Okay? But my next step, I've got to undo that times 19, so I'm going to divide by 19. Ooh, that looks like a 7. There we go. Divide by 19 on both sides. All right, when I do that, these undo each other, but the x squared drops down. The now approximate symbol drops down. And whatever that previous number is, I still have it on my screen, divided by 19 will be my next number. So I'm just going to take this whole thing, whatever this whole long number is, and take that previous answer and divide it by 19. And most calculators, they usually have a previous answer button. Like my previous answer button is down here where it says ANS. But a lot of times if you just push divided by, it just automatically knows to take the previous answer and divide it by your new number. So I just divided the previous one by 19. And I get another kind of crazy ugly number. I'll say it's about 15.1. But again, I'm not going to clear it off my screen. I'm going to use this number when I do my next step. And yes, I'm rounding on my paper, but that's just to show my work. I'm not actually using 15.1 when I do the next step. All right, but I'm almost there. Last step, because it's a radius and it was squared, we have to undo the squaring. So I'm going to square root it. But what I do to one side, I have to do the other. So squaring and square rooting undo each other. I get x approximately, and now I've got to square root this whole thing. All right, so depending on how your calculator works, I have to square root the previous answer. All right, so again, I'm not retyping that whole decimal in, and I'm also not rounding it. I'm just using what the calculator already did for me. Notice I still get a crazy answer, and this is where I'm going to have to round it to give a final answer. Because x is going to be approximately, let's call this 3.9. All right? So we can say that the radius is about 3.9 centimeters. Okay? So notice, it was a little messier, but because I had a calculator and it was doing all of the decimal work, it wasn't so bad. All right, but just go through step by step and just be careful to pay attention to whether I give you the volume in terms of pi or not. All right, because it does make a difference. All right, if you notice in that previous example, it was in terms of pi, so it was a lot cleaner and easier to work with. The second one, not in terms of pi, so we went into decimals right away. Okay, so hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that like button. Also subscribe because it really helps us out. But with that being said, good luck on your math, and I will see you next time.